Hey guys, we're at the Comal Appraisal District today speaking with the director and the liaison about all things homestead, your property valuations and property taxes, and how to protest those two things. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We know you're busy these days, so thanks for your time.
No, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So
Appreciate
Jeffrey Booker, you are the chief appraiser here. I think I said director at the onset, but it's actually chief appraiser.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, so
Yes,
tell
sir.
me what you do.
Sure. So the chief appraiser in the appraisal district is tasked to set all values each year at 100% of market value. We administer all exemptions here at the office. And through that valuation process, there's an equalization period, which is the protest, which I'm sure we'll talk about. The importance of the appraisal district and being valued at 100% of market value has to do with state funding. The comptroller audits the appraisal district on every odd year. And if we're not within a certain confidence level, that could affect state funding for the ISDs within the county. So
Okay.
that's in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And Larry Hermance?
Taxpayer liaison.
Taxpayer liaison. Let's get that straight off the bat. So is this a new position, Larry? And what is it that you do?
Relatively new. Once Comal County hit a certain threshold population-wise, the tax code mandates that there is a taxpayer liaison. I don't work for the appraisal district. I don't work for the tax office. I'm appointed by the Comal County Appraisal District Board of Directors. And my job is to assist the taxpayer, explain policies, procedures, basically a resource for them, almost like an ombudsman.
Okay.
All
right. Thank you, gentlemen. So let's assist the taxpayers today.
Sure.
And let's start off with something that's so important. And many people either forget about it, didn't know about it, but I'm surprised sometimes. And that's homestead. So let's talk about the importance of homestead.
Sure. So the homestead, if it's your primary residence, a property owner has the ability to apply for a homestead exemption. Depending on what each entity honors, it is amounts off of your taxable value that is very important. And I think we might go into this later, or Larry, you can elaborate. If your homesteads, if you forgot about it or you didn't know about it, the statute does allow us to go back up to 2 years and apply that homestead exemption for you.
Okay, so you can go back 2 years, just not 5 or 10 years. You can go 2 years.
Right. The homestead exemption, that part of the code allows us to go back up to 2 years.
2 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if somebody forgets, somebody's watching this right now, is like, oh my God, I never applied for my homestead. And I've been in my house 2 years, and they've lost thousands of dollars in savings and tax savings. Then they just apply and apply once. People don't have to apply every year.
No, sir, they do not. Okay. Unless we ask them to reapply, and usually those scenarios are, unfortunately, if there's a death in the family or if something changes with the property, we're going to ask them to reapply to make sure our records reflect who's actually living in that property.
Okay. Larry, you want to expand?
It is more common than you think that people forget about it. And I'm very happy when, not that they forgot, but that I got them to go back 2 years.
Right.
Because the homestead exemption for a residential property is big. It caps at 10% how much that starting value for taxes is. And then once you get that value, then the additional exemptions start coming off. And it can be quite a difference between your market value and what you're actually taxed on.
So Can you guys talk about the cap a little bit more? I've got a list of questions here, and that's at the top, obviously. So talk about that 10% cap, because like no matter, let's say the market goes up 300%, or sometimes it just goes very high, right? Where things are just hot. So that taxable value, if I'm saying that right, cannot go higher than, is capped at 10%?
For a homesteaded property. So let's take an example. Say last year your property was valued at $100,000. But for the following year, the value goes up to $500,000. So if it's a homesteaded property, that homestead cap would kick in and you would only be assessed, or your taxable value would only be 10% more than it was the year before off of that 100,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And you would take that now $110,000, and then, for example, the school districts give you an additional 40,000 off.
Right.
Comal ISD not only gives you 40,000 off, but then 20% off of that. In Jeffrey's example, that 500,000.
Right.
So you can see taxable values. In his example, you can see taxable values market at 500, and you can see taxable values in the hundreds.
Yeah.
Okay, can we hit on that now? The exemptions, different types
sure.
of exemptions?
Sure.
So, because we have a number of them, including that Comal, that sweet Comal ISD one at 20%. So go ahead.
So yeah, there are several exemptions. There's a disabled veteran, disabled person exemption. Disabled veteran has different ratings depending on through Veteran Affairs how they're rated as a disability. There's a 100% disabled veteran. All those will be applied for and administrated through our office, and we will process all of those. There's also an over 65 exemption. Not every entity honors the over 65 or the homestead, but your big ones, your schools, your counties, those are going to honor those amounts off, and they're important. Over 65 is very important, especially in a market like we're in this year. Those ceilings, it doesn't freeze your value, but it freezes the amount of dollars paid each year in tax dollars.
Is there a such thing as a senior freeze?
The over 65 has a freeze ceiling, but that's what I was saying. It doesn't freeze your value each year, but it freezes the actual dollar amount you pay in taxes. So your value can still fluctuate, but for the entities that honor that over 65, you shouldn't pay more than your qualifier year of that freeze ceiling, unless you do something to your property. You add a pool, you change your property somehow. That's going to adjust your ceilings.
You made a good point about the veterans 100% disability, but I tell people, look, even if you're less than 100%, like 10, 20, 30, 90%, apply for the homestead because you're going to get monies back.
Absolutely. There are exemptions for partial disabilities. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And then Comal ISD, which I walked into the office one day a couple of years ago, like, when did this start? Nobody had any idea. Just that's fine. Just leave it in place. But it's a 20% extra local homestead school exemption.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
It is. It's a big benefit to property owners here.
I mean, especially like people who live in mud districts. It's just, where the property taxes are a little bit higher because of the developer's infrastructure. And that's big time.
It's a big benefit to property owners. Absolutely.
So very important again, guys, if you have not applied for your homestead, this is what you're missing out on. And it takes like 90 days to kick in to process.
We have up to 90 days to process the application. We try to do them sooner, but we have up to 90 days to do that.
So your message to people who haven't done it yet?
Come in and see us, and we'll assist you
Give me a
best we
call,
can.
Brad.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can they do it? Can they come and see you? Can they call? Can they do it online? What's the process like?
There's a couple ways. They can come in, fill it out here in the office. We have an online portal where it's all PDF based. They can pre-fill everything, upload their driver's license images, and submit it online. Whatever's best. We have people mail them in, email them in, whatever is more convenient for the property owner. So.
And I'd like to just piggyback off that because I see what's wrong with the applications a lot of times because they'll bring it to me and it's really simple. They forget to attach a driver's license or the driver's license doesn't match the homestead and it has to do that.
Okay. There is a buzzkill here. You know where I'm going with this?
No.
So if you're somebody who purchased a property as an investment, you cannot homestead your property.
That's correct.
Protest.
You can absolutely protest, but for a homesteaded property, it has to be your primary residence, and the code says that. So that's why we ask for copies of driver's license to verify that it is a primary residence. So, but you're absolutely right. You can protest. Each year stands on its own. We value as of January the 1st each year. So values could change. They could go up. They could go down. No matter what the value does, a property owner can always protest their property.
Okay. I want to jump into protesting right now, but before we leave homestead and exemptions, is there anything else you want to add about those two things?
The only thing I'd want to add is anybody that sees this, don't be afraid to call. Don't be afraid to reach out. That's my job. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find it.
Perfect. All right, so let's talk about property valuations and property taxes, about how to and all those good things. So how's it going so far? I mean, how does it go every year? Do we see this steady stream of people calling or coming in, requesting to protest?
We do. Last year was more than others, obviously. But not to be year specific, every year property owners, they protest their property, and a lot of it is lack of information. We have a lot of people that come in, and once we sit down with them or they sit down with an appraiser, and we kind of explain the process and how it's going, they understand. But now some people, they just 100% disagree with their value, which is completely understandable. But that's what that equalization process is for, to relay information to make sure we are valuing the property as accurately as we can.
Okay.
You want to totally agree that a lot of it is a lack of understanding the difference between a market value and what the taxable value actually is. And for some people, what we just talked about, that 20%, they can actually lower their market value and raise their tax liability.
Yeah.
So, and I hate those calls.
Right.
I appreciate you doing this, because the more message we can get out, the better.
I think it's important, like you guys being here and giving us your time. It's just a fire hose of information that many people are just, they never knew before. So just the education piece of it is going to be, I feel it, helpful.
Right.
That's always the aim.
Absolutely.
So thank you again. So let's talk about valuations. All right. And you showed me a piece of paper earlier, but let's go over, there's different numbers on your property valuation that you receive in the mail. One is market value. So let's talk about what the heck is market value.
So market value, I think I've already mentioned this, but the appraisal district is tasked to value all properties at 100% of market value as of January the 1st. Why that's important is, I mentioned we were tested by the state comptroller's office. Mm-hmm. When they audit us on our values every odd year, we have to be within 95 and 105%, of market value. Okay. So it's a pretty small window, but we need to make sure we're within that valuation, because if we're outside of that, it affects the amount of funding that school districts get from the state. Sure. So it is mass appraisal though. So it's not like when you go buy a home and you get an independent appraisal done for your financing. This is mass appraisal. When we're adjusting values, we're looking at a group of properties and looking at medians and finding our ratio to see if we're within 95 and 105%. And we're going to adjust the values accordingly so we can be within that range.
And thank you for that information. At the same time, is that the most accurate way to appraise?
That's the way the appraisal district is tasked to appraise the property.
Which is why you welcome the...
Absolutely. There's that equalization process. Texas is a non-disclosure state. I'm sure you know that. Right. So we don't get all the sales that happen in Comal County. We have a lot of property owners that come in and they bring us sales information.
Right. How do you find out? Because we are, like you said, a non-disclosure state. So people don't have to tell you how much they bought their house for.
Absolutely not.
And you send out surveys, but you get 2 out of 10 back maybe?
So we'll get about a 25% response from our sales surveys that we send to property owners.
Which isn't enough, right, to help you out, but it's some.
It's some.
It's some.
We rely heavily on the property owners. When you come in and protest your value, a lot of people get with a realtor and they'll, bring in comparative market analysis. Sure. They'll bring in MLS sheets, and that's information we might not have had that we'll use in our analysis to make sure we're trying to be at 100, or we're as close to 100% of market value as we can be.
Let me ask you something, Jeffrey and Larry. Why don't appraisal districts use the MLS? Because that seems to be the most accurate way to do things.
We don't have access to it. I don't think.
Zillow has access to the MLS. You guys are important than Zillow when it comes to appraising homes.
I don't have a great answer for you for that. I know appraisal districts around the state, some used to have it, and they've actually got kicked out of it. Okay. I don't know those specific situations. We just do the best we can with the information we have.
Well, it goes back probably to the non-disclosure part.
Yeah.
It does, absolutely.
Because MLS would
Absolutely.
totally give it away. Okay, so let's talk, you mentioned January 1st.
Mhm.
Okay, so that means your market value, that's what your house would sell for as of January 1st of that year. All right. Now, there's an interesting and favorable twist for property owners right now because they can work with their real estate agent to get sold comps, active comps as well, pending comps, or just sold comps.
We do it all based off of sold. So if it's pending, we don't take that into consideration yet. So
Do you allow then, because our marketing of brownfields in Comal County, guys, it actually jumped between June 2022 and the end of the year.
Right.
It actually increased. So I tell people, look,
right.
hold on, okay? And then after January, it started to tumble. So what you're saying now is that, Larry and I talked about this the other day, and my ears perked up. I'm like, wow, that's kind of like, that's favorable for taxpayers. But now you can take sold comps, close comparables, let's say from deeper into January or February or even March, correct?
We do. We look at when we do our analysis, we have to have a cutoff point at some point to send out our notices. But just take 2023 for instance. We're going to use sales from January 1st of 2022 through March 31st of 2023. So about 15 months of sales we're going to use to analyze so we can get the values as accurate as possible. The reason we do that, the snapshot is as of January the 1st. But when we're tested by the state comptroller, they actually test us on 6 months of sales that we haven't even received or weren't able to analyze yet. So we want it to be as accurate as we can as of January the 1st.
Okay, very important, guys. It's not just January 1st, but that's what the appraisal district goes by. You're now allowed to go through March 31st. You have to have everything final by July to hand over to the taxing entities so they can set rates.
July 20th, we will certify the roll and we will get that to the taxing entities.
Okay, so that's the reason behind the timeline, but that works in this instance, this particular year. I think in any particular year it would work, unless it just zoomed up at some point after January. But in this particular year, absolutely. Okay, so we covered that. So make sure you choose your comps and make sure they're solid comps. Just sold comps is what the appraisal review board looks at, correct?
So the appraisal review, but they're going to look at anything that a property owner brings in, and we can't tell them what to bring in. So anything that a property owner feels is relevant to their case, why they think their value should be adjusted, absolutely bring that in and present it to the appraisal review.
But in the interest of time, to not waste anyone's time, I can say, you guys, make sure you get with your agent to bring in realistic and solid comps. Go ahead.
Red, remember, they're looking mass appraisal. So you could have a situation on a new build where on January 1st it was at 50%, yet the district captured it at 100.
Mm-hmm.
That person needs to protest.
Sure.
Because he can prove, oh, you had it at 100 and it was at 50.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I tell property owners this all the time. You know your property better than anyone else. I have a hole in my roof. My flooring is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures, cost to fix, estimates. These are all things that not only the district will look at, but if they're unable to come to an agreement in an informal meeting, those are things that help the ARB determine market value. Obviously, if you're gutting a bathroom, your house isn't quite as marketable.
Right.
So pictures, evidence, it's not just sales. There's other things that can go into the value of a property.
If I could elaborate on that just a little bit, we've talked about an informal meeting and going to the appraisal review board. A majority of protests that are filed, they're taken care of on the administrative side at the appraisal level. They don't even go to the appraisal review board. So that's just sitting down with an appraiser, having a one-on-one, letting them know what your issues are, what sales comps you have. We listen to them. We take a lot of that information into consideration, and if there is any adjustment or we see any inaccuracies, we do fix that. So
Okay, so I mean, let's say you don't agree on that value. Does it then go to the ARB?
it does, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So how many cases or protests would you say settle? What percentage?
Over 50% settle informally here at the district. Like I said, a majority of them, it's all taken care of informally. So
Okay.
The sad part is how many people file protest and don't show up. I don't know if it's because maybe they calculated that 20% and realized, oh, or maybe they saw what their taxes are and they're less than they were for 22.
Right.
So I don't know what the reasoning is, but I feel bad about it for the people that need to be in here. The person that needs and has good evidence to show that their value is a little off. But we had 72 people not show up today.
Sure.
And
Right.
I not think that's education. And I think things like this are going to help.
Sure.
Before we jump into what assessed and what taxable value mean, what are the different ways? How can people protest?
Several ways. They can come into our office, file online. When they get their notice of appraised value, there's a protest form in there. We
On the
have,
back side of the.
yeah, it should be a separate sheet. It'll be the protest form. It'll give you rights and remedies in there as well. That's going to be the protest form. We have an online portal where you can file your protest online. They can mail it in, email it in, kind of the same way as exemptions. We have tons of options to make it as convenient for the property owner as possible. So,
Very good. All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
We have market value. We have assessed value. Explain assessed value.
You want to do assessed value or want me to do assessed value?
We can both do it.
You guys find out who's going to spell assessed value. You can't get any better than this.
I'm not going to use the definition in the tax code.
All right.
I'm going to be more detailed and say I'm going to define assessed value for a residential property that is homesteaded. And that way I can keep it simple.
Thank you.
And that value is the value that we talked about that cannot go more than 10% a year.
Mhm.
That all the taxing entities, if you look on that notice of appraised value, all the taxing entities start with that number. And then they start taking off the 20%, the 40,000 to give you your taxable value.
Okay. How do we come to, okay, so we just covered assessed. So assessed is, if I'm
At one
hearing this
point, the assessed value and the market value were probably the same.
Right.
And then you applied for your homestead.
Right.
And if the market value went here, your assessed could only go 10%.
Okay. So we can't really say that your assessed is what you paid minus the exemptions.
Yes, like on that notice, you're going to see the assessed value, and then underneath, there's going to be all your taxing jurisdictions that are listed. So from that assessed value, then it's going to take off the 20%, the additional 40,000, and it's going to give you a totally different value than your assessed value. It's going to give you that taxable value.
Okay. All right. So thank you for those great explanations. It's important.
Oh, absolutely.
Important
How
and
many times-
confusing.
Right. But how many times you get people calling in or stopping in and saying, what is this? What is that?
That's a
Every
daily,
day.
daily. Yeah.
And do they leave with more light?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. That's what we kind of said early on. We're here to help educate people, and
Right.
So we're here to help.
Somebody protests, right? Do they have to request they're protesting a market value set by the appraisal district? Do they have to request for evidence? Like, how did you come to this market value? How does that work?
So they can request the evidence, and we'll have to provide that to them 14 days before their hearing date and time. We will send that with their notice of hearing. We try to send the evidence out to everybody. Last year we had about 30,000 protests, so there was a lot that we had to prep and get ready.
Out of 34,000 parcels in Comal County, I think we have 35,000.
We have 115,000 parcels.
Maybe just the New Braunfels, it's 35,000. 115,000?
About 115,000 for 2023.
So we had roughly 30%.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
A little under 32,000 last year filed a protest.
the one thing I want to get into, because we have quite a few people and clients who come here, they buy land or they're building new construction in general. So at the time they're building, let's say they're building on January 1st,
Mhm.
you're not going to appraise when it's dirt, correct?
We will.
Or when it's dirt, you do.
Right, we will.
But so it'll come across maybe as $200 or $300, and they're thinking, "Wow, what's this? This is my property tax. I can live here forever." But you're just basically you're assessing it on that dirt, not the build.
So we're going to take a snapshot as of January the 1st. And Larry kind of touched on this earlier. If you're building a house and let's say you've got the slab, the framing, and your roof on as of January the 1st, we're going to assess all of that.
Okay.
Now that improvement is not going to be assessed at 100% of the value because obviously as of January the 1st, it was only about 50% complete. So we're going to assess that property under construction as accurately as we can based off of what we can see and what we have access to value that property. So
So when it comes, let's say their house is finished in April or May, then because I have clients telling me this, hey, somebody came by the house today, it's in January. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But
Sure.
somebody's going to show up
right.
since it was built in 1 year, and January 1st is the time you guys fan out all the appraisers.
Sure.
So it's common for appraisers to show up on a new construction build when it's complete in January, correct?
Absolutely. We're going to try to be as close to that appraisal date as possible. Now, that following year, remember I said we only appraise that property at 50%. We're going to go back, and it could be August, September, and we're going to make sure that house that was 50% on January the 1st for 22, let's say, is 100% complete for 23. We want to make sure it's as accurate as possible.
Okay. Now, when somebody protests, there's a section online or on the forum that asks them, hey, what do you think your sales price should be
Right.
as of this day?
Opinion about you.
Opinion,
Right.
evaluation. Should people base that on their evidence as well and not just some arbitrary number?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason I say that is because say we don't come to any agreement on the informal meeting and the property owner has to go to the appraisal review board. The board is tasked at setting market value based off of the evidence presented. They're going to weigh the evidence between the property owner and the appraisal district. And based off of that evidence, that's how they're going to make their motion and set that value for that property.
Larry, did you want to?
Yeah, when we talked about a person that maybe has an issue with the house, and that may help bolster their opinion of value. The ARB is looking, how did you come up with your opinion of value? So I want to see your evidence. Does your evidence take us to that value?
Basically, Larry mentioned earlier you had a hole in your roof. Well, maybe the appraisal district didn't know that. When we set our valuations, well, if they brought in pictures, estimates to fix any of that to the appraisal review board, that's good evidence to show the appraisal review board how their property actually sat as of January the 1st.
Okay, so we're all set. We've got all this information, we've got evidence, we submit online, through the mail, in person, we're ready to process, we're ready to go. What are the next two steps? Is the homeowner, the primary homeowner of that homestead, waiting for the appraisal district to respond, or how does it work?
Yeah, so we'll get all of those protests, we'll process all of them and set them up. We will notify the property owner, most common ways by mail. And like I said, that's 14 days before the hearing date and time. Mm-hmm. That notice by mail is for your appraisal review board hearing. But in the letter, we state or ask to come 30 minutes early so you can have that informal process to sit down with an appraiser. If you did indicate on your protest form that you wanted it by email, we will email you all that information. So, okay. But all that's going to come 14 days before the hearing date and time.
Now, when people hear ARB, like appraisal review board, that sounds like people's court. You know? It's like, whoa, that can get a little intimidating, but explain the process there. We have peers on one side and peers on the other side. How does that set up?
The appraisal review board is made up of citizens who have resided in Comal County for at least 2 years. And it's you, it's me, it's your neighbor. And their job is very simple. They're not to be appraisers. It is a little bit like a courtroom. and they're to listen to your evidence, they're to listen to the CAD's evidence, and determine what the market value was on January 1st. And if anybody's interested in being on the ARB, have them contact me, because that's another one of my jobs, is to help facilitate the ARB.
Let's give people some tips on how to be successful if it goes to ARB. Is it just a matter of being prepared and having accurate comps?
Absolutely. I'm going to use Larry's example he used the other day. It's probably not good evidence to go into the ARB and say my value should be X and have nothing to support that. Like I said, they set their value based off of weighing evidence. So that's what they're going to look at.
Totally. I go in and listen to these hearings. I want to hear what the ARB's doing, and I am really disappointed when a property owner comes in and all they say is, it's just too high.
Right.
I don't disagree with them that it may be high, but they forgot to bring any type of comp. They forgot to bring that
Just venting and really.
that the fascia is termite infested or whatever.
Right.
And here again, education.
Right.
Education.
And just to kind of pause here, if you guys are watching this, please drop your questions in the comment section below, and we're going to do our best to respond to them. But the appraisal district is an open book. You can email me online, in person, electronically, whatever.
Yep.
And you can, if you have questions, send them to me.
Right. So we're going to do that. May 15th. All right. That's and see Larry's smile.
D-Day.
Right?
D-Day.
Right? So May 15th is the deadline date to submit and resolve, or just to submit?
Just to submit your protest.
So you don't have to have it resolved by then.
No, sir.
All right. So as long as you submit it, you can get called in, let's say, end of May or sometime in June.
Yeah, so the protest season will run through May, June, and July,
Okay.
the beginning of July. So
right.
This year we went a little past that, but that's the typical protest season for an appraisal district.
And again, because you have to have final valuations in by July, so you can hand over to the taxing entities.
Yes,
so they
sir.
can set their tax
Yes, sir.
Okay. What if somebody misses the May 15th deadline?
So they have another, do you want to go over this? They have another option. May 15th is the hard deadline for a regular, timely filed protest.
Okay.
If that deadline is missed, there is what's called a 2525D or D1, which is a 1/3 or a quarter over protest. That is a late protest, so there are some stipulations to that protest. It has to be filed by the delinquency date, which is January 31st. And the property owner is going to have to prove that their property is being valued a quarter or a third over market value
If they miss the deadline.
if they miss the normal protest filing deadline.
So if they did it within the deadline, they wouldn't have to prove that?
Right.
Ah.
And a late protest comes with a 10%
10% penalty.
So not only do you have a tougher road to hoe, the district being off 25 or 33%, which is difficult, or Mr. Booker probably won't have a job if they're off that much on too many properties.
Right.
Sorry, Jeff.
That's all right.
And it comes with a 10% penalty. So
there is.
you can always file a protest and withdraw it.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to add that maybe we didn't cover?
Well, I'll tell you one thing I say when we go out into the public. Evidently, that's something that's relatively new that the district does that. I haven't had any problem asking the district to do it. The more education we have, the better. But I always tell people, if you get nothing else out of this, know you have somebody to call.
Absolutely.
I will take a call. I will answer your call. And as I said before, if I don't know the answer, I will find the answer.
I completely agree. We are here for, we're tasked to set market value, but we're here for those property owners. We're an open book. We try to be as transparent as possible. If you're entitled to something, if we notice you haven't gotten your homestead, we try to bring those things up and help the property owners out. So we're here for them. So.
Last thing I would say is it's kind of a circle. January 1st is the day they're appraising. Every April, look for that notice. Every May, they're certifying. And the most important meeting taxpayers can go to start in August and September. That's their taxing units. And on the Truth in Taxation website, it tells people who their taxing units are and when they meet. That's the most important meeting because the appraisal district sets a value, the taxing units set the rate, and the tax office simply collects.
Knowledge is power.
It is. Yes, sir.
And a little knowledge is dangerous.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for having us. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
You're right, including
Thank you.
myself as well as hopefully you guys out there.
Sure.